American-seated Jests of George Peele, gentleman, sometimes a student in Oxford, wherein is showed the course of his life, how he lived, a man very well known in the city of London, and elsewhere. The Jest of George and the Barber. George was not so merry at London, with his capons and claret, as poor Anthony the Barber was sorrowful at Brainford for the loss of his lute, and, therefore, determined to come to London to seek out George Peele, which by the means of a kinsman that Anthony Knitt had in London. His name was Cuts, or Feats, a fellow that has good skill in tricks on the cards, and he was well acquainted with the place where George's common abode was, and for kindred's sake he directed the Barber where he should have him, which was at a blind alehouse in Seacoal Lane. There he found George, in a green jerkin, a Spanish platter-fashioned hat, all alone at a peck of oysters. The Barber's heart danced within him. For joy he had so happily found him, he gave him the time of the day. George, not a little abashed at the sight of the Barber, yet went out to discover it openly. He, that at all times had a quick invention, was not now behindhand to entertain my Barber, who knew for what his coming was. George thus saluted him. "My honest Barber," quoth George, "welcome to London. I partly know your business. You come for your lute, do you not?" "Indeed, sir," quoth the Barber, "for that is my coming." "And believe me," quoth George, "you shall not lose your labour. I pray you, stand to and eat an oyster, and I'll go with you presently. For a gentleman in the city of great worship borrowed it of me for the use of his daughter, that plays exceedingly well, and had a great desire to have the lute. But, sir, if you will go along with me to the gentleman's house, you shall have your lute with great satisfaction. For had not you come, I assure you, I had sent to you. For you must understand that all that was done at Brainford among us mad gentlemen was but a jest and no otherwise." "Sir, I think not any otherwise," quoth the Barber. "But I would desire your worship that, as you had it of me in loan, so in kindness you would help me to it again." "Oh God, what else?" quoth George. "I'll go with thee presently, even as I am. For I came from hunting this morning, and should I go by to the certain gentleman above, I should hardly get away." "I thank you, sir," quoth the Barber. So on goes George with him, in this green jerkin, a wand in his hand, very pretty, till he came almost at the alderman's house, where, making a sudden stay, "Afore God," quoth George, "I must crave thy pardon at this instant, for I have bethought myself, should I go as I am, it would be imagined I had had some of my lord's hounds out this morning. Therefore I'll take my leave of thee, and meet thee, where thou wilt, about 1 of the clock." "Nay, good sir," quoth the Barber, "go with me now, for I purpose, God willing, to be at Brainford to-night." "Sayest thou so?" quoth George. "Why then, I'll tell thee what thou shalt do. Thou art here a stranger, and altogether unknown. Lend me thy cloak and thy hat, and do thou put on my green jerkin, and I'll go with thee directly along." The Barber, loath to leave him until he had his lute, yielded to the change. So when they came to the gentleman's porch, he put on George's green jerkin and his Spanish hat, and he the Barber's cloak and his hat. Either of them being thus fitted, George knocks at the door, to whom the porter bids heartily welcome, for George was well known, who, at that time, had all the oversight of the pageants. He desires the porter to bid his friend welcome, for he is a good fellow and a keeper, Master Porter, oft that at his pleasure can bestow a haunch of venison on you. Marry, that I can, quoth the barber. I thank you, sir, answered the porter. Master Peele, my master is in the hall. Pleaseth it you to walk in? With all my heart, quoth George. In the meantime, let my friend bear you company. That he shall, Master Peele, quoth the porter, and if it please him, he shall take a simple dinner with me. The barber gives him hearty thanks, not misdoubting Master Peele any way, seeing him known, and himself so welcome, fell in chat with the porter. George Peele goes directly to the alderman, who now is came into the court, in the eye of the barber, where George, after many complaints, draws a black paper out of his bosom, and, making action to the barber, reads to the alderman as followeth. I humbly desire your worship to stand my friend, in a slight matter. Yonder hard-favoured that sits by your worship's porter hath dogged me to arrest me, and I had no other means but to take your worship's house for shelter. The occasion is but trivial, only for stealing a piece of flesh. Myself consorted with 3 or 4 gentlemen of good fashion that would not willingly have our names come in question. Therefore, this is my boon, that your worship would let one of your servants let me out at the garden door, and I shall think myself much indebted to your worship. The kind gentleman, little dreaming of George Peele's deceit, took him into the parlour, gave him a brace of angels, and caused one of his servants to let George out at the garden door, which was no sooner opened, but George made way for the barber seeing him any more, and all the way he went, could not choose but laugh at his knavish conceit. How he had gulled the simple barber, who sat all this while with the porter, blowing of his nails. To whom come this fellow that let out George. You orson keeperly rascal, quoth the fellow, do you come to arrest any honest gentleman in my master's house? Not I, so God help me, quoth the barber. I pray, sir, where is the gentleman Master Peele that came along with me? Far enough, quoth the fellow, for your coming near him, he is gone out at the garden door. Garden door, quoth the barber. Why, have you any more doors than one? We have, sir, and get you hence, or I'll set you going, goodman keeper. Alas, quoth the barber, sir, I am no keeper. I am quite undone. I am a barber, dwelling at Brainford. And with weeping, tears up, and told him how George had used him. The servant goes in and tells his master, which, when he heard, he could not but laugh at the first, yet in pity of the poor barber, he gave him 20 shillings towards his loss. The barber, sighing, took it, and towards Brainford home he goes. And whereas he came from thence in a new cloak and a fair hat, he went home weeping in an old hat and a green jerkin. Merry Conceited Jests of George Peele was narrated by Sarah Blake, with music by Tom Cowell. It was produced by Sounds Curious for Beyond Shakespeare.